Well, thank you for joining on 5 p.m. at the end of a long first day, I'm sure. What I've got planned here today, I wanted to start talking about how to design for the Salesforce platform. Given just some tips and tricks here today, some real-world examples of things that I've done in the past, and I think a good takeaway for you guys today as you're trying to build more and more on top of the Salesforce platform. But first, a bit about myself. So I'm Aaron Rich. I am a co-founder of EchoUser, and we are a user experience research and design company. We do user experience research and design for all sorts of applications, everything from mobile, tablet, in the enterprise world, consumer-focused things. But really, a lot of what we do when we talk about user experience and how we apply it to any kind of design process, applies very specifically to Salesforce. And just also a little bit of background on myself, I actually used to work for Salesforce. Prior to founding EchoUser, I was one of the early members of the UX team within Salesforce. So I want to bring a bit of that perspective as well, because I've seen it from both sides. I've seen what Salesforce was doing back in their early days and how it kind of evolved into what it is today. And now on the consulting side of things, I get to be out there talking with real companies that are building real products, working with Salesforce, and seeing a lot of the challenges and the evolving side of what design is and what user experience is today. So with that being said, why are we here? My guess is a lot of you are here because, one, UX is a bit of a buzzword right now. You hear it quite a bit. Everybody's talking about it. Not everybody necessarily knows what it is other than, I think I want it, and how do we start to do more of it? But one thing that we talk about when it comes to UX is starting to think about exactly what it is, what it means, and sometimes you think about the bad experiences that we have with software. I love kind of referring back to this picture here, coming out of Office Space, of just an experience with something that just infuriates you. We've all had it with software, something that was just designed poorly. And part of what we want to talk about today is how do you get away from that? How do you ensure that you don't actually design and develop something that gives those awful kind of experiences for folks? So I'm going to be a bit more interactive here today, where I've got a couple of activities where I'm actually going to invite somebody up to kind of participate in a quick UX activity just to kind of showcase how it actually would work and how you can incorporate it to development of Salesforce apps. But first of all, I'd just like to open up and get a sense from you guys. When you hear UX, user experience, I'm always really curious to know what you think that means. So please, if you could just sort of speak out. When you hear UX, what does it mean to you? Somebody, what was that? User interface, yep, so the interface of it, definitely one piece of it. Research. What else? What the user feels when you engage with the system. Yep, like that one. Intuitive to the users. Yes, that's the word we often hear when talking about UX is intuitiveness. Seems to be something that kind of goes hand in hand. Other things that come to mind when you hear UX. Graphic prototyping, is that? The graphical side of things, visual. Yep. Rapid prototyping. Okay, sorry. Yep, rapid prototyping. Say that again? Interaction with technology. Yep. Any other ones that we kind of missed or you haven't heard shouted out that you usually think about? Say that again? How quickly you can get to it. Yep. So kind of like efficiency. So all these things are definitely a part of it. Some other ones sometimes I'll end up hearing are things like how it looks, the visual side of things. Definitely another important piece of it. But when we talk about user experience, this is the way that I often try to define it. It's really an interaction with a product, service, company, or person. And that's intentionally pretty vague and pretty all-encompassing. But let me give you 4 actually really different examples of that. Now, when talking about UX, one of the things we will often hear is Apple. That's the one that people love to point to, and they do have a great user experience. They got everything from the hardware to the software, all in this integrated type of experience that people love, have talked about, and they've done a really good job of bringing UX to the next level. So that's a nice, easy one. But I actually do talk about Salesforce quite a bit as the cloud experience. Think about, when Salesforce first got on the scene, and the idea of moving things into the cloud was pretty novel, getting away from all this on-premise stuff, and the experience that you actually start to create around that. It's not a software experience per se, it was more just getting away from these on-premise and how you can start to move it in anywhere, anytime you can access your stuff. A third example that's even further removed from software is this idea of what Zappos.com does. Shoes, and what they're known for is customer experience. They're known for having these sales reps, or customer reps, I should say, that are going above and beyond to make their customers as happy as they can be. If you're returning something, they want to make it as easy as possible. And so they've really built their reputation and their customer experience around that, and people know them for that. Now, a fourth type that's a little bit different is this idea of a retail experience. And so think about Starbucks. You walk into a Starbucks anywhere in the United States and sometimes even around the world, and you're getting this similar experience, and that's been very thoughtfully designed. And these are all parts of UX as well. You're trying to evoke the same experience as you walk in so that it seems familiar. You know what to do, you know the line to get into when you're buying your coffee. These are all just different elements of UX, but all really important to think about when you're designing things. So when we start talking about designing for Salesforce, let's talk about actually at first a couple of myths that often come up that when people are talking about user experience. I wanted to dispel a bit. One, this is one, if you've heard it, let me know. UX is only design. This is something that, okay, user experience, it means the design work. Okay, great. So it's like, how do we start to design it? What does it start to look like? But that's not just what UX is. UX is really this holistic process. And I'll kind of go through and show you some examples and specifically how to build some Salesforce apps using a UX process that really goes beyond just the design aspect of it. Another one, people always say, oh, we got to have our genius designer. We need that really killer designer who can create that great UX experience for us. People think about, the Johnny Ives from Apple or those caliber of designers. And I tell folks that it's really not that necessary to get, that caliber person. If you have a great UX process in place and you're getting regular feedback from users, which I'll talk about in a bit, that is one way to really create these killer UX experiences. Another one is sort of the unicorn designer. This is looking for that designer who's both a visual designer, an interaction designer, a front-end developer, all in one person and all killer skills in all three areas. And I'll tell you, it's almost impossible to find these folks too. They do exist, they're out there, but they're really, really difficult to get. What I usually tell people is that you can kind of break this up again into a couple of different folks and responsibilities and still create these great UX experiences. The other one, only designers can design. When we're working with teams who are building kind of products and services, we're trying to make everybody a designer. And it doesn't matter if you're from product marketing, if you're from a C-level person, everybody's got ideas. And trying to incorporate that into a design process, you can be a designer as well. And UX takes time, too expensive. If you've heard this one before, there's always little things that being done, little ways to incorporate a good design process or getting some quick feedback to create those killer experiences that you're really trying to make with your products. And then another one, sometimes people say, well, it's really difficult, it's rocket science. And what I'm going to try and do here today is kind of break down a couple of really simple things you can do to just sort of start as you're developing some of your apps for Salesforce. And then one last one, people will sometimes say, well, stealth is the way to go. I'm developing this killer idea. I don't want anybody to know about it so I can be first to market. Usually I try to debunk that and say, if you've got a great idea, it's really all about execution. And so the way to do that through a good UX process is talking to as many people as you can, getting as much feedback as you can from customers and just your potential users as well. And then finally, sometimes you hear that, oh, I can be unbiased. I know what my users need. I know how to design this right. The problem is you probably can't. And that's where it's really helpful to talk to your customers, talk to your users, get them into that design process. Don't be afraid to use them as a feedback mechanism as part of that. So I'm kind of curious here, just by like a show of hands, how many folks here have actually built an app on Salesforce? Got a whole bunch of folks, great. How many are in the middle of it now or planning to? A few more? Okay, great. Well, so when we talk about trying to design for Salesforce, we're at a really interesting time right now because there's a lot of great opportunities to really go beyond what has been sort of the traditional Salesforce UI and really create some new novel experiences as part of it. But one of the questions I usually ask when people come to us and say, we've got this great idea, we want to build on top of Salesforce. Should we do something that looks extremely different than some of the native stuff within Salesforce? And this is the first question I usually try to ask them. Is there a need for consistency with the Salesforce platform? Because if you think about it, if you're using what's sort of tried and true, you're getting a lot of things built in for free. You think about all the people who know how to use the various forms that exist today, the different objects, that whole standards and what the pages in the platform sort of looks like today, people know how to use that. And so, can you just build on top of that to really create what you need as part of an app? But there are definite reasons where you want to start to break from the existing standards. And you need a really good reason to be able to kind of do that. So it's really this power of customization and trying to use it wisely. There are more resources than ever at the moment to really be able to do a lot of cool customization within Salesforce. There's sort of the promise of Salesforce Aura, the Salesforce One, and everything's kind of going on there. There's even third-party types of products like Squid that allow you to really do a lot of cool customizations, all still on top of the Salesforce platform. So the question is trying to identify, when is there a good reason to actually break from those standards? And that's where, if you're thinking about this idea of our expectations around what, when we're actually building apps and using apps, what people's expectations are these days, because they've changed a lot. If you think about 5-10 years ago, what you typically would have then is that there's this enterprise type of look and feel. It was definitely more kind of form-based, and that's just the status quo. You went into work, and that's what you got. But now our work lives and our personal lives and the apps that we use being always connected, there's a lot more going on there, and our expectations around what a good experience is within software have changed because of what's going on in the consumer world and starting to bring itself into the enterprise. So it's probably a term that you probably have been hearing more and more about, this consumerization of enterprise. So this one example, just to kind of show you within Salesforce how this starts to work. I believe it was last year during Mark Benioff's Dreamforce keynote. He was talking about Virgin America and some of the cool things that they were doing just around chatter, bringing in their passenger information, and being able to interact back and forth. Now, if you're just using kind of the tried and true standards within Salesforce, on the left there you've got a detail record type of page, and that's just not going to excite a passenger or customer service rep that's trying to interact with, especially with like Virgin America, where they've got a pretty good sense of design and what they're trying to evoke as part of their own experience. So what they ended up doing is really kind of customizing that experience. What you've got on the right for Virgin America, it's basically kind of chatter built into getting some information on the passenger records. Looks really different, and it allowed their passengers and the customer service reps to really interact back and forth with each other in a what was not necessarily a novel way, but in a way that felt like a true experience that Virgin America wanted to have with their customers. So this is just sort of one example of how you can start to bring the UX design, really adapt it for the enterprise world. So a couple other tips before we kind of get a bit more hands-on. In order to get those types of experiences, well, you don't just start designing and get that right away. How do you get there? A big piece of it is really talking to your users. You've got to really understand what it is they need, how you can best serve and support them. The other thing you got to be careful, though, of when you're actually starting to design these experiences is being aware of your bias. Again, as you're starting to build your own products and services on top of Salesforce, you may think you know what's actually needed for your end users, your customers. But until you actually start to talk with them, you're going to find there could be some important differences. The other piece of it, and I heard this kind of come up when talking about UX, is starting to iterate in terms of the design and then testing it. This is like kind of a really important process piece when it comes to user experience. You never just design in a black box and you've got your final designs at the end and then expect it to work right. You have to be testing. You've got to be changing it as you go, learning from it, and really iterating and evolving your designs as you go. And then the other thing that I always talk about, especially with the Salesforce platform, is starting to think to the future. We already see the big push within Salesforce of really moving into mobile and tablets. And there is more and more connectivity and a lot more that can be done within that context. You got to find the right type of information because what you've got on a desktop is not going to always work within a mobile environment, but it is something you have to be aware of when you're thinking about your own kind of designs. And the other ones, even more forward-looking, thinking about wearables and other types of things that are going to start to make their way into the enterprise side of things. Within EchoUser, we've actually done some work of looking at, what does wearables, what could it look like within the enterprise world? It's still very early, and you're starting to see more and more things like that, but there's definite interest, and the technology is there. It's just trying to figure out how we can start to actually utilize it to help in an enterprise way. And then the last one here is to think about, context is king. What you're designing, it's not just on a screen or on a phone. There's going to be something more around it. Where is a salesperson actually using that app on a site with a client? If you're designing for somebody else, what are they doing in the real world? That context is going to be so important and have so much meaning when you think about the experience and the design of it. So it's really going beyond just the software, looking at that context. So to take a step back, we've talked about, for Salesforce, a lot of, ways to start to incorporate a better kind of UX process, some things you can do as you're building. But when we talk about a UX process, there's really kind of 6 key pieces to it, the way I tend to think about it. On the very early side of it, there's things like discovering, understanding your users, starting to assess. These are things like, usability testing and whatnot. It's really the research side of it, understanding the context, how you're going to start to build things. Then you do start to get into the design side of stuff, but that's after really learning more about what it is you need to build. So this is where you start to define what's it going to look like, what are the design requirements, conceptualizing it a bit. This is things like starting with high-level concepts of what it could start to look like, then getting into deeper and deeper wireframes of what you start to build out and the details of those. And then finally, you notice that the visualization part of it, that's really the tail end of this whole process. While we talk about user experience and the visual side of it is definitely important, it's usually not until the tail end, after you're confident that it's working right, it's supporting the people you're trying to design it for, and then applying this great visual side on top of all the great interactiveness that you've put there. So let's talk about UX in practice, and I'd love to get an opportunity to show you some of that research and what it starts to look like. And what we're going to talk about and actually have demoed here is just a usability study, just to show how you can really get some quick user feedback. And this is something that we do with either customers or potential customers, and it's really a way to make sure that whatever you're designing, whether it's an early paper prototype or a final coded version of a product, that it actually is going to meet the needs of your users. Not only that, you can actually get great feedback along the design process from those users so that you can tweak it, iterate it, make changes, and then possibly even retest it to see, hey, does this improve the experience? But when we talk about a usability study, this is where a usability study is basically where it's more like a one-on-one type of situation where you're working either directly with the customer, the user, and the goal is you want to show them that design that's in progress. And we want to do something that's a bit more task-based. So tell them to do X, Y, and Z. Where would you go for this? And we're going to actually have them go through and watch them do it. And try not to interrupt them, let them kind of get through it. We don't want to bias them because you learn a lot of information just watching what people will naturally do. And then you get a chance to ask questions either at the end or sometimes along the way about what was clear, what was not. Is there terminology problems? Is there a better way that they could see of doing some design? Did it actually help them in a real-world situation, or could it? It's this type of information that's going to really give you info on, hey, our designs, are they doing what we think they are? Are they better than what we had before? So this is the way we kind of go about trying to structure it. So here's where I need a volunteer. I'm wondering if I can get somebody up here for about 2-3 minutes to basically act as a participant for I got a volunteer over there? Thank you. Please come on up. Hi, and what's your name? Kieran. Kieran? Hi. Kieran, all right. So Kieran is going to help out with this little demonstration here today. If you could, I'll just have you right in front of the computer here. And what's going to happen is we're going to do a little usability session here on the Airbnb site. And so what we've got right in front of you here is basically a little scenario that we'll often put together for a participant just to kind of set up what it is this person's supposed to be doing as part of it. So I'll just kind of read it off here. The scenario we got here today is that you're going to be traveling to Chicago. You need a place to stay November 7th through November 9th. And you'd like to stay at a local's house to get some great recommendations of what to do. And what I'm going to do in a moment here, I'm actually going to switch it over to a browser, to the Airbnb site, and just ask you to go through and do kind of a quick booking based on that info there. And then we'll all kind of be the observers here, and we'll often, when we're actually doing this with real design work, we'll have like the development team or the product team kind of observing just like this. Usually there's like a wall or one-way mirror in between, so unfortunately we get to see everybody here. But yeah, so let's switch over. All right, and we're going to pull up Airbnb here. Great. All right. So, Kieran, if you would from here, and if you could sort of think out loud, I'll have a little mic here just to kind of mic you up as you're kind of talking through it. If you just sort of talk through, what you're thinking about as you're trying to set up this, this private room in Chicago for November 7th through the 9th.
Okay. So I'm thinking I need to go to Chicago. So I'm going to click here, and I can see that Chicago's come up as that first one, and I think that's where I want to go. So November 7th, so I'm going to just use that little arrow over there and do the 7th and then through the 9th. Oh, that's right, yep. And then it's just me, right?
Just you, yes.
Just me. I'm going to click search, and I can see that I have a variety of things. Now, I don't want to spend $1,000 per night. I'm not sure if that's per night or total.
Okay.
But I'm going to bring that way down. I don't know. I'm going to be really optimistic, and I'm going to get, and I want a private room because I want to meet locals. And I can see that as I work through it, it's filtering on the left here. And it does actually look like so how do I sort? Well, maybe there's more filters. So I need Wi-Fi and I need a kitchen. I'm assuming there's going to be a kitchen. English. And I don't know where I want to stay. I'm just going to click show listings.
Great. And how many listings now do you have based on that?
I have a lot. I have 569.
Okay, great. So a couple things right there. So normally at this point, we've had a chance to kind of go through and have her actually do the task. And as somebody kind of watching, I noticed that there was some, that slider trying to get the right settings for like the amount. I might ask a follow-up question like, the slider, is that something that you'd be able to use to kind of, is that the way that you want to actually narrow down to a certain type of price range, or is there an easier way to do it?
I think it was good. It's just I had a hard time because I couldn't figure out on the laptop where the clicker was.
Gotcha.
But I didn't know, I still don't know if that's per night or, assuming it's per night.
Yep, so and that's another good thing I probably would have dived into, because I did hear her mention out loud, I'm not sure if it's per night or if it's for the full time that I'd set it up for. I guess it was 3 days. So that'd be something that, as you're kind of listening into that, it's like, how can we make that information more forthright? Do we need to show, hey, this is the per night kind of metric, or, this is for the total stay? So it's things like that that we're kind of listening for as you start to watch somebody kind of go through and use it. It's amazing the type of information you get, and the more people you do it with, the more consistent you're going to get. You're going to see some trends pop up, and then get a better sense of, hey, are there any showstoppers or some minor things that could be fixed to improve it? So, Kieran, I want to thank you very much for coming up. So thanks for being able to kind of demo. All right. So that's just one example of a type of kind of research activity that you can get a lot of quick information and really use that to improve designs that are in progress. Now, just to kind of quickly go through other types of activities, and we don't have time, unfortunately, to go into too much detail, but just to give you a sense of different things that can be done, starting to look at on the research side things like customer journeys. What is it like from whenever they start to work within the enterprise world or the app that you're trying to build? Where is that first piece that they're kind of getting into, and then where is the endpoint, and is there an endpoint? Trying to figure out what that shaking is. Is it an earthquake or is it just something else going on? Just something shaking. Okay. Other types of things, starting to do just one-on-one interviews. These are all just different types of things you can do. Creating like personas, these archetypes users that you can use to really rely on your design work and what's going on. Focus groups, competitive analysis, all these things are different ways to kind of research and understand who it is you're building this for, who you're designing it for. Now, getting into the assess side of things, we saw an example of usability testing. Now, if you do a lot of these kind of little cycles of testing like this, after each one, if you can make some changes, retest it, and see, hey, is this actually improving it? And there's different ways. Once you get more and more advanced, you can start collecting some metrics around it, or just being able to see over time, you're hoping to see an improvement in the overall designs. And doing these kind of things really checks in with your customers, your users, to create better products and services. Now, starting to get into the design side of things, you want to start to understand those use cases. What's the context of use? That's got to be the underpinnings before you get to any design work at that point. Starting to map out the user flows. What's it going to start to look like? How do you get from point A to point B? And even storyboarding. So using things that you see like in the comic book world to help showcase. All right, what's the story of where somebody starts, what they're going to do along the way, and without getting into any of the actual user interface, but just again that experience around it. And then starting to actually conceptualize it. This is where, okay, we're actually getting into some actual design on paper type of work. What is the home screen going to start to look like? How are we going to get through the site, the navigation of it? These are sort of the next pieces. And it's a big piece because that's going to be something that sets the framework for the rest of the design that you're doing. And then starting to visualize it. This is some of the final steps of going from that low to high fidelity wireframes, the look and feel, the visual side of it, getting some prototypes that are much more further along, high fidelity, and then something that looks close to the final product that actually will get implemented. So let's talk about a specific kind of use case. And one I want to talk about is Hoopla here. We had a chance to work with them on a design project. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Hoopla, they basically are a tool for sales reps, and it creates this gamification, if you will. Allows salespeople to kind of compete with each other in kind of these fun game ways, encourages people to be competitive in a good way so that you try to sell more. And what they were looking to do is really help out some of the admins who were helping to kind of set up Hoopla for the first time. And so the challenge was really taking a look at this existing kind of system that had been around for a bit and trying to figure out how can we create a better first-time experience when trying to actually set up. So this is more, again, on the admin side of things, but still really important, especially in the sales cycle when you want someone to be getting up and running as quick as possible with it. So what did the UX process for something like this start to look like? Well, the first thing we had to really do is take a look at what was already there and really understand, okay, what was working and what potentially could be some areas that we'd want to focus on to really improve that first-time experience. So we talk about a design review. This is just looking through it, taking some good UX practices and trying to figure out, hey, we know this could be an area we want to improve, or this is something we think we've heard from users has been a problem in the past. Now, once we kind of highlighted a lot of those different areas, this is where, okay, great, we get to start talking about, what does a redesign look like? How can we reconceptualize some key pieces? And what you're seeing on the right here is, some of those early designs is really done just with sketches and just on paper. And there's a good reason why we do it this way, because we want to have things that we can try out and not feel afraid to just throw away if it's not working. If you start getting too far down the road of putting it into a real-looking kind of prototype or even into code, you're less likely to say, you know what, this direction's not working, let's throw it away and start over. But if you're just sketching it out, you're much more likely to do that. So that's why we like to really explore a lot of early concepts in this way. From there, you start to get into the medium fidelity wireframes. And here's where you're getting higher and higher fidelity. And one thing I want to point out here, you may start to see that, hey, this is something that's looking different than a lot of the standard Salesforce pages. So what happened here? Why did we decide to go in a different direction? Well, this was a case where there was a really good reason to break from Salesforce forms. Trying to put together this idea of Hoopla had this idea of like channels and how you sort of put together TV content in a meaningful way. And so this is something that, just with the form, having kind of blank, here's the content, all listed out, wasn't going to be as intuitive to folks. And so we wanted to find a way to mimic a TV channel a bit more and be able to kind of show this content in a way that you can kind of interact with it and see the output of it. So that's why we started to get away from it, starting to get into this new kind of design that really was a clear break from traditional kind of Salesforce UIs. So great, we went this new direction. Now, whenever you do that, there's a distinct probability that what you're doing may have some problems that were unforeseen as part of it. So this is where that doing some lightweight usability testing, what we just did up here, getting a chance to talk with real users and see, hey, this is something really different, but do you get it? Does this concept support how you'd want to set up for the first time? And then you're learning from that, learning where, nope, this didn't work here, let's change that piece of it, or hey, this seems to be working better, great, let's continue down that path with that one. So finally from there, once you've done a number of iterations, you're feeling much more confident about it, and you're getting closer to the high fidelity wireframes, the final visual look starting to get applied, and then you're starting to get into the development mode of that. But this is just an example of taking all that, some of the final output. But to get to here, there was a lot of steps along the way before you can kind of get to that final look and feel and redesign of it. So to kind of wrap up here, just a couple of final thoughts when we talk about designing for the Salesforce platform. One thing I would say is that no design is going to be perfect the first time. You really do have to iterate constantly and use feedback that you're getting from real customers, real users, in order to get a great experience around that. I've seen too many times, unfortunately, where people just kind of go into their black box. They just kind of keep going down one path without ever talking to anybody about it, and then usually it's like too late. That's where you get to, hey, we've gone into development, we didn't really talk to anybody, and we're going to run into all sorts of problems. That's kind of the antithesis of a good UX process, and something that you really got to be careful of. You're investing time and effort in lower fidelity designs. So I mentioned in the Hoopla case, where if you can actually just stay within your early sketches or something that you're not afraid to throw away, you get a chance to really be a bit more innovative at times, or you can try something that's way out of the box. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work at first, but at least you tried something different, and then you may get a nugget of an idea there that maybe you can use in some small piece somewhere else in your designs. So think about that. If you really want to try to explore new ways, something that's going to be really different, that's one way to kind of do it. Being careful not to reinvent the wheel unless there really is a good reason for it. Determine if you have a reason to make that UX different. Again, it's the context is king type of scenario. If it's something that's meant for salespeople, they're really comfortable in the traditional Salesforce forms and the objects and whatnot. That's where they've lived for a number of years, what they know inside and out. So trying to give them something too drastically different, there's got to be a really good reason for that. Now, on the flip side, if you're trying to support somebody who's not maybe as familiar with that side of things, or there's a job function that is much more consumer focused, you've got a lot more reason to start to really break and go in a new direction when it comes to the user experience. And again, as I mentioned, because of this consumerization of enterprise, there are more expectations of the consumer side of things and the consumer style of design really making it into the enterprise world. So you do have to be aware of that. And then, as part of that, so people do expect better UX within the enterprise world now. So I think I've got a couple of minutes left here. I wanted to see if there's any questions just about kind of UX in general. It looks like we got about 5 minutes to kind of run through. And I know there's a mic in the back there. It might be best if you can get up to one of the mics.
On? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. So one of the challenges in the enterprise space is kind of editing down the number of features. You know, a lot of you talk to a few different users, all of a sudden your very clean concept is getting muddled with more and more features. So do you have any advice or guidance on how to kind of negotiate with your customers, the number of features to put in, or prioritizing those features so that you can maintain that good user experience?
Yeah, feature creep. You know, it's a problem that always pops up. You know, part of it, there's like different types of activities that can be done to help kind of prioritize things. You talk to a customer and yeah, you're going to get, you know, this laundry list of things that they want to put in there. But when you start to ask them, all right, well, tell me, you know, whether it's just as simple as give me your top 3 or 5. And if you do this across a number of different customers, you're going to see that bubble up to the top. Now, sure, eventually they're going to want kind of the rest of it, but it's going to start to give you a better idea of those, you know, what does that top 5 really start to look like? And beyond that, you know, sometimes, you know, just asking customers, they're going to tell you, this is what we want, or we want to design this specific way. And usually, you know, as a UX person, I'll try to take a step back and understand what's the underlying reason there? Because what they're saying might be a little different from the problem they're actually trying to solve. So those are kind of 2 different issues because, okay, yeah, you're trying to prioritize and figure out the top, you know, X number of things to kind of include, but then also you're taking a look at the underlying causes so that, you know, does it marry up to the, you know, those priorities of the features that you have. So using kind of those 2 mechanisms, you can start to like really narrow in on, you know, what's the true problem, what are the true things that they're asking for, and then, you know, you can't do everything at once. And so, you know, you want to create the best experience you can, starting smaller. You know, we sometimes in the startup world we call it like the MVP. You know, you want to give the minimum viable product and just start with those core, you know, sets of features. You get that rock solid, and then start to add to that over time.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for this, and 2 hopefully quick questions. 1, how early would you, in the process, do you think it's worthwhile to bring in user testing? I know some people even like to do it sort of when you're at that low fidelity stage. And the other question is, do you have any experience or with some of these new sort of web-based user testing companies that are out there that will supply you with, you know, video or things of people using your site? And if so, maybe how to get the best out of those?
Yeah, sure. So to the first question, you know, is there ever too early a time to really do kind of usability testing, user testing? And I usually answer no. You know, you can get feedback on paper prototypes. You know, we do it all the time, and usually what you're doing at that point is just trying to get a general sense of the direction. Is this even the right way to go, or did we, you know, is this concept just way too outside? People just would never get it. And you know, you get some positive confirmation. You know, then you start going down one path, maybe higher fidelity, you know, designs, and then you're getting beyond just the paper prototypes. You know, you're getting into, you know, wireframes and things like that. But you know, we love to try to test early and often. And if there's some design, and there's a question about it, like we just don't know, we want to talk to real people, real users. So that's what I usually advise. Is just the early you can talk about it, you know, with somebody, the better. To the second question, you know, the types of tools out there to kind of help with some of these things like usability testing. There's a number of good ones now. Usertesting.com has one. There's a couple others of similar vein. What they're really good for is if you've got, you know, obviously like a web app, and so building on top of the Salesforce platform is actually quite good for that because, you know, it's just basically able to kind of see somebody kind of going through using your web app as part of that. If you're doing things like, you know, mobile designs or tablet designs, it's a little bit trickier. There are some companies that are coming up with testing solutions for that too, and it's just not quite as mature as the web-based ones at the moment. But yes, there's definitely some good services to kind of get some of that quick testing feedback that way as well.
Sorry, if I could ask a real quick follow-up. Have you found, usertesting.com is the one that we're sort of experimenting with, but I think we're having a tough time, like, setting good requirements for the users because you can sort of dictate that, and if you leave it wide open, I think some of the feedback that you tend to get tends to be, you know, really unfocused.
Yeah. That's the challenge of like user testing and any of these kind of services, right? It's just that, if you don't realize the right questions to ask or set up the test in the right way, then you're going to get a whole wide variety of info. That's often like if you're working with, we tend to know, hey, what are the right questions to ask, the right way to ask things. And so this is kind of the next level of this one-on-one kind of testing where you can really dive in deeper and somebody who's a bit experienced with it. But, user testing and those kind of things are the great kind of first step if you're just trying to get into this idea of user testing for the first time.
Thank you.
Any final questions?
Last one more. So I understand the value and really enjoy working with the lower fidelity deliverables that you talk about earlier on in the phase. Do you ever find that you either get customers or stakeholders that are reacting negatively to those deliverables simply because they are lower fidelity, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are just some people who can't see beyond the low fidelity, like I just don't get it. It's not the final design. Usually what we try to do, there's different ways that I've seen designers try to tackle that. That's where sometimes like getting just basic, back to the basics, like through sketching, people tend to recognize, hey, this is a sketch. This is not a final design. And so they can give you feedback on, the design itself and not how it looks. That is kind of a criticism sometimes that pops up, that if you've got a wireframe that's maybe a medium fidelity, doesn't have the final look and feel, people just focus too much on, well, where are the colors at, or why does it, this doesn't look like the rest of our buttons throughout, Salesforce. Sometimes you got to fill out your audience a little bit. Some people are, much more open to, yes, I get this is just a design in progress. But if you're having those types of problems, I would say get back to, more basic, lower fidelity, just sketches. And then it's really hard for people to say, well, but this doesn't look like it. Oh, yeah, it's just a sketch. And they kind of get that. There's another tool, Balsamic, which is, allows you to create things pretty quickly, but it still has that sketch look to it as well. So it's another tool we've used to kind of help with when we know that there's that kind of a problem of people focusing too much on the final look of a design.
Thank you.
Any other final questions? Great. Well, thank you very much for your time and coming to see, and I hope it's been useful for you.